Jennings, Louisiana is a small town of about 10,000 people. On May 20th, 2005, the first of many victims, 28-year-old Loretta Lewis, was found in a canal. Over the next 4 years, 7 more women, all from the same small community, would be discovered dead.
What's that? Just the emergency.
No problem. All units standby.
I'm at the corner of Pleasant Hill and John Young Freeway.
1519 East 18.
Welcome back to Crime Solvers Central, where we dig deep into the darkest and most baffling unsolved cases. I'm Jayce.
And I'm Charlie. Today we're tackling one of Louisiana's most haunting mysteries, the Jeff Davis 8, sometimes called the Jennings 8. Between 2005 and 2009, 8 women were murdered in Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana. Their bodies were found in swamps, canals, and by the roadside. And to this day, not a single conviction has been made.
That's right, and these women weren't just random strangers. Most of them knew each other, some were even related, and nearly all had connections to law enforcement as informants, which makes this case so much darker than a standard serial killing. And to add to that mystery, the investigation itself has been clouded with allegations of corruption, cover-ups, and misconduct by police.
The victims were Loretta Lewis, 28, Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson, 30, Kristen Lopez, 21, Whitney Dubois, 26, Laconia Brown, 23, Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, 24, Brittany Gillery, 17, and finally, Nicole Gillery, 26, in 2009.
The disturbing part? Most of their bodies were too decomposed to confirm the cause of death. But for 2 women, Ernestine Patterson and Laconia Brown, they had their throats cut. For the others, asphyxiation is suspected. The victims all struggled with poverty, drugs, and work, but they were also police informants, and many of them reportedly feared for their lives before disappearing.
Exactly. And critics, including author Ethan Brown, who wrote Murder in the Bayou, argued this wasn't the work of a lone serial killer at all. Instead, the evidence points to something even scarier: systemic corruption and possibly law enforcement involvement in silencing witnesses.
So today, we'll walk through the timeline of events, the connections between victims, the suspects, and the theories, and ultimately, why so many believe that this is not just an unsolved murder case, but an unsolved cover-up.
On the edge of Cajun country lies a small town, Jennings, Louisiana. It's a place that used to be known as quiet farmlands, but now the roads are a haunting reminder of the horrible things that happened there.
All right, Jayce, let's break this down chronologically because the timeline here is crucial. The murders span from 2005 to 2009, but patterns start to emerge if you look closely.
The first victim was Loretta Lewis, age 28. On May 20th, 2005, a fisherman spotted her body floating in a canal just outside Jennings. Loretta struggled with addiction and worked the streets. At first, many assumed that her death was drug-related, but then, just weeks later, another woman turned up.
That was Ernestine Marie Daniels Patterson, age 30. Her body was found in June 2005, also in a canal. But here's the difference. Ernestine's throat had been slit. That moved this beyond overdose territory. It was clearly homicide.
And yet, even with a homicide, the investigation floundered. The police have arrested or issued warrants for the arrest of 4 people in connection to the case. But none of these charges would stick. Evidence was handled poorly, and within months, they were all released.
Fast forward almost 2 years, Kristen Lopez, 21, is found in March 2007. Again, she was nude, dumped in water. Kristen was close with many of the other victims, including her cousin, Brittany Gillery, who would become the 7th victim. So, Jayce, all of these young women are found dead in this very small community, and they seem to have links to each other or know each other in some way, shape, or form. It's just, why do you think maybe the alarm bells didn't go off sooner?
That is the big question. I wonder that myself. I mean, we have these 3 cases that are right next to each other. They're all connected, and it's in this small community. You would think at this point that there would be some big, aggressive serial killer investigation. But it's because these women were in poverty. It's because they were struggling with addiction. And their cases just weren't prioritized.
Exactly. The stigma around their lifestyles allowed law enforcement to kind of downplay it or lessen the sense of urgency around it. But then the pace of the murderers picked up.
In May 2007, Whitney Dubois, aged 26, was found by the roadside, not in water like the other victims. She was connected to Loretta through family ties. Then, in 2008, 3 more victims. Laconia Brown, Crystal Shea Benoit Zeno, skeletal remains found in the woods. Brittany Gillery, only 17 years old, found off a highway.
And then, in August 2009, the last known victim, Nicole Gillery, 26. She was discovered near I-10 just hours after being reported missing.
That's 8 women in 4 years, all from the same area, many directly connected to each other, and almost all of them linked directly to law enforcement as informants.
And here's another layer. Many of those women reportedly feared that they would be next. They'd tell friends or family things like, "I know too much." That's not typical behavior in random serial killings.
No, it's not. It points to an environment where the victims were all aware of a threat, and they believed that threat came from people in power.
And remember, all of this is happening in a parish of just 10,000 people. That makes it nearly impossible for these deaths to have been a coincidence.
Exactly. And when you look at the connections, like their shared family ties, shared homes, overlapping relationships, and their roles as informants, you start to see the outline of a much bigger story.
So now that we've walked through the victims and the timeline, let's shift gears. The next question is, who could be responsible? Was this a lone killer or something much more sinister?
8 women murdered over a 4-year span in south central Louisiana. Loretta Lewis, Ernestine Patterson, Kristen Lopez, Whitney Dubois, Laconia Brown, Crystal Benoit Zeno, Brittany Gillery, Nicole Gillery. Their unsolved killings garnered national attention, often portrayed as the work of a serial killer.
Now eyewitness investigator Mike Pearlstein has obtained never-before-seen police documents, and what he's found suggests a very different and frightening theory.
All right, Charlie, so now that we've laid out the timeline and the victims, let's dive into the big question. Who did this? From the very beginning, law enforcement pushed the idea that a serial killer was responsible. 8 women, similar backgrounds, found in a relatively small area. On paper, it fits.
Some believe that once you dig deeper, the serial killer theory starts to fall apart. Author Ethan Brown, in his book Murder in the Bayou, argues that this wasn't a serial killer at all. Instead, he points to something more disturbing, a network of corruption involving law enforcement and local figures.
So, let's break down the 2 main theories. The task force of 14 agencies, formed in 2008, was officially searching for a common offender. They said it was likely one killer who was targeting these women, someone who was taking advantage of their vulnerability.
And from a distance, it makes sense. Same geographic area, same victim type, similar disposal methods. But if this was just a serial killer, we'd expect some kind of evidence trail. DNA, patterns, maybe even a suspect profile that stuck. But after 2 decades, nothing concrete has tied a single individual to all 8 murders.
Exactly, which leads us to the alternative. This theory has far more weight behind it. All 8 victims served as police informants. They weren't just random suspects on the street. They were all deeply tied to law enforcement. Some even had sexual relationships with officers.
And several of them were witnesses to the 2005 police shooting of Leonard Crochet, a drug dealer who was unarmed when killed by police. Multiple future victims of the Jennings 8 were there. Many believed Crochet was murdered by cops. And suddenly, witnesses started turning up dead.
That looks less like a serial killer and more like systematic witness elimination.
Exactly. And then there's the sheriff's office scandals. One investigator bought a pickup truck that witnesses say was used to transport Kristen Lopez's body, and he had it cleaned before reselling it. Another deputy was implicated in 7 female inmates, and yet those officers kept their jobs or were shuffled into other roles.
And the victims knew too much. Nicole Gillery, the last victim, had been a witness in a prior jail corruption case. Brittany had lived with another victim right before her death. Kristen Lopez had been present at the Crochet shooting. It's like they were all being silenced, one by one.
We also need to talk about Frankie Richard, the strip club owner and alleged pimp. He admitted to being a crack addict, admitting to having sex with most of the victims, and was one of the last people seen with Kristen Lopez.
Richard's name is everywhere in this case, but charges never stuck. Some people think that he was protected because of his connections to law enforcement.
And interestingly, Richard himself once said, "These girls lost their lives because they seen something, heard something, knew something." That statement alone almost backs the theory that they were silenced, not randomly targeted.
So, was Richard just a convenient scapegoat? Or was he part of a bigger conspiracy? One that was tied to law enforcement figures who were untouchable?
And that's the million-dollar question. Add in the jail ring, where deputies were accused of raping and female inmates, and you've got a chilling backdrop. Several of the Jennings 8 had ties to that system.
The most damning part is the allegation that law enforcement actively covered this up. Evidence mishandled, investigators who raised concerns pushed out, and DNA testing of officers never publicly released.
It's the classic question. Was this gross incompetence, or was this deliberate obstruction?
Given the sheer number of failures, the connections between victims and police, and the lack of convictions after 20 years, it all leans heavily toward obstruction.
And in a small town like Jennings, where power runs deep through family and politics, it wouldn't take much to keep a lid on things.
So, a serial killer or a cover-up? To me, the cover-up theory is a lot stronger. But either way, 8 women are dead, and their families still have no answers.
And that's where the frustration and the fear still live in Jennings today.
Jennings is a small town on the edge of Cajun country. The paved streets give way to dirt roads as you hit the rice fields and crawfish ponds on the outskirts. These farmlands should be peaceful, but in Jennings, the roads lead to dark reminders of the horrible things that happened to 8 young women here. They all knew each other. used drugs together, and one by one, they all became murder victims.
So, Jayce, one of the hardest things about this case for me is how badly the investigation was handled.
Right. I mean, from the very start, evidence went missing, leads weren't followed, and key witnesses were ignored. Even when tips suggested that law enforcement might be involved, those claims didn't get the attention they deserved.
Take Sergeant Jesse Ewing. He recorded witness statements linking deputies to the disposal of evidence in Kristen Lopez's case. Instead of being supported, he was pushed out of his job. That's not how you get to the truth.
And then there was the investigator, Warren Gary, who bought a truck that witnesses tied to one of the victims. By the time anyone looked into it, the truck had been cleaned and resold. Instead of a full inquiry, Gary was fined and reassigned.
And we also can't ignore the jail scandal. Multiple women came forward saying that deputies trapped female inmates. Several of the victims had connections to that jail, which suggests that they may have known too much.
Exactly, and with those kinds of allegations, the family's distrust of law enforcement makes complete sense. People in Jennings have been outspoken, and they believe the truth has been buried.
But here's the important part. Families and advocates haven't stopped fighting. Books, documentaries, and community voices keep this case alive. And every lead, every witness who comes forward pushes it closer to resolution.
That's right. The failures in the past don't mean this case is over. They mean the work for truth and accountability is still ongoing. And it's possible answers are still out there.
There are some big questions surrounding this investigation. Teresa Schmidt takes those questions to Sheriff Ricky Edwards.
I respect these ladies. They had some serious problems in their lives. I am a true believer that every life is salvageable. I'm a true believer that each one of these ladies did not deserve to die, contrary to what some of the rumors and speculation are out there. And we're going to do everything in our part, as far as my office and as far as this team, to bring those responsible to justice for these ladies.
So, we've talked about the victims, the timeline, the theories, and the failures in the investigation. But, more important than anything, we need to remember why we're here. 8 women lost their lives, and their families still deserve answers.
And this case isn't closed. It's not forgotten. Every tip, every lead, every new set of eyes on this case matters. If you know something, no matter how small, it could be the piece that helps bring justice for these women.
If you have information about the Jennings 8, you can reach out directly to authorities, or you can submit tips anonymously through crime hotlines. And of course, you can always contact us at crimesolverscentral.com. We'll make sure your information is shared with the right people.
And if you don't have information, you can still help. Share this episode. Talk about this case. Keep these women's names alive. Loretta Lewis, Ernestine Patterson, Kristen Lopez, Whitney Dubois, Laconia Brown, Crystal Zeno, Brittany Gary, Nicole Gillery.
Their lives mattered. They were daughters, sisters, and friends. And remembering them is part of demanding accountability.
And we believe that with persistence, community, and awareness, that this case can be solved. Hope isn't lost. It's what keeps us moving forward.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into one of Louisiana's most haunting mysteries. I'm Jayce, and this has been Crime Solvers Central.
And I'm Charlie. Everyone, please stay safe, stay curious, and stay loud.